Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the My Betting Mates Kickoff podcast, your My Betting Mates football podcast dedicated to all things A-League and English Premier League. We're trying something new here today. We're in our new studio and I'm joined by Nick this week. So welcome aboard, Nick. And we've got A-League and Premier League action to review today. So thanks for joining me, Nick.
Not a problem at all, Matt. Thanks for having me.
No, all good. So we'll start where we normally start in the A-League, a bit closer to home. And obviously another big week there. But I think one of the main talking points has been Perth Glory just turning it around from being one of the maybe easy beats in the league to, as you've called them, box office.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the last 5 weeks, they've turned things around. You look at the results and the way that they've done it as well. A lot of come from behind wins. It feels like that in every game, even when they're behind, they're never actually out of it, especially at home where they've sort of, I wouldn't say I've turned into an entire fortress just yet, but they're starting to, get results at home, getting a bit of momentum there, as we saw on the weekend with that win against Brisbane Roar. Really emotionally charged win as well when you think about what a big week it's been for the club. Ownership situation off the field's been sorted out with the Poliga Group buying in, but their form on the field, they took the lead early through Adam Taggart. They went behind, but the way they battled back in the second half with Taggart and Kolakovsky scoring the goals to get the win, it keeps them. I mean, it's a slim chance, but they're right still in with a chance of playing finals football. And you do get a sense that if these wins keep piling up, that momentum's only going to keep growing, because what Alan Stajic has done, he's done a fantastic job, considering his hands have been tied with some of their sort of transfer business going into this, considering the ownership situation prior to this. And when you got Adam Taggart banging in the goals as easily as he has, it's looking quite good for the Glory going into the remainder of the season.
Yeah, I think the ownership saga obviously was a big dark cloud hanging over the club. Earlier in the earlier weeks of this podcast, we were referencing Stagic's terrible win rate. And it just felt like that no matter what they did, no matter how well they performed, the other team would find a way to score a late winner or get a late equaliser. I think maybe Taggart finding his goal scoring form's probably really shifted the momentum. They're obviously scoring more than they're conceding now, so that helps. Helps you to win more games than you lose. But they've been a really sort of interesting turnaround. And like you say, now they're in a chance, I guess, to put themselves back in the finals discussion. Still a bit of ground to make up, obviously, but it would be a great story for this season if they were able to sort of clinch into that finals. Then you never really know what can happen from there. I guess that's sort of the beauty of the A-League.
Absolutely. And this, I think people might forget, how big of a club Perth Glory are. I think in an A-League sense, we've only seen a small sample size of what they can be when they're firing. I think back to a few years ago when Tony Popovich was coaching and they hosted a grand final at Optus Stadium. They had 60,000 people through the gates that day. They won the premiership that year as well. Obviously fell short in the grand final, but what they had was a real groundswell of excitement around the club that hadn't been seen a lot through the A-League era, but back in the NSL, remember, their grand finals at Subiaco Oval and how big of a club they were. So you look at it now, if they can start to get a semblance of that again, a bit of excitement comes back to HBF Park and they can, get the fans back on side, it'll be huge for them. So we saw there was only about, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 people at the game last week, but it felt like that there were, double that. They were riding every challenge towards the end. The noise that they were generating those last few minutes, they really willed them over the line. And as I said, if you've got a guy like Adam Taggart, who has been unbelievable this season, kind of flown under the radar given what Bruno Fornaroi's done, not only has he been massive for the Glory, but it does what it does for his own stocks, because he missed out in the Asian Cup squad. He missed out in the World Cup squad due to injury around about just over a year ago now. So puts him back in that discussion for the March qualifiers coming up for the Socceroos. And certainly with this sort of form, it's hard to ignore if you're Graham Arnold.
Yeah, no, definitely putting himself straight back in contention. And I guess another team that we focused on in the column this week that's probably notable for the wrong reasons is Adelaide United, a team that really have failed to impress this year. I think there was a lot of hype with them sort of coming. Look, obviously they lost Goodwin during the transfer window heading into the season, but a lot of excitement around some of their younger players. And it's just never really quite clicked for Viet this year. It's just been a little bit all over the shop. What have you made of them?
Yeah, well, I mean, they started the season brilliantly. I mean, a 3-0 win against the Mariners, a 6-0 win against Melbourne City, and I think we all thought no Goodwin, no worries. But things have really turned since then. I think only 3 wins since those opening 2 games of the season, which just goes to show, that they've got some issues, I think, at both ends of the park at the moment. They have lost Joe Gauci as well, who moved to Aston Villa, Alexander Popovich to Korea as well. So they have lost players, but it's the players they've kept that haven't been able to reach the same heights this year. I feel for Nestor Irankunda because he's got so much hype around him that he feels like, he has to carry everything that's sort of Adelaide. You see that he takes those games where he's not playing well really personally. He's got the weight of that Bayern Munich move, which is coming at the end of the season. And we haven't seen the best of Nestori, probably to the same extent on a consistent basis this year. So we haven't had, I guess, seen that same attacking verve from them that we saw earlier in the year and even last year. I mean, they were very reliant on Craig Goodwin. This year it's been, the players like Zach Clough and Irankunda and Halloran that have had to, sort of shoulder that load, but they haven't been able to get to it at the same level. But defensively, there are frailties. Even when they had Joe Gauci, they were still leaking goals. They weren't keeping clean sheets. That back four, I think it does need some work in the off season. Its season's not done yet. Like for them, they're 6 points outside the top six. They can still turn it around. But it just feels a little bit concerning at the moment that even last year and in years prior when they had those defensive frailties, they were still scoring enough to get the results. Right now, the goals have dipped, the chances have dipped, the defensive frailties are coming more and more to the fore. And I think that this weekend when they play Western Sydney, it's not entirely must win, but if they lose that game and they fall 9 points behind the race, I think that's when, the alarm bells are really starting to ring. But you win that game and suddenly you're right back in the mix for finals football.
Yeah, it's crazy. They're second bottom of the ladder, but you still think of them as, like you say, only 6 points. So it's, as always, it's really tight when you get to those, those bottom three positions in the top six. Certainly not over for them, but they're going to have to find a marked improvement in their form. They obviously play Western Sydney Wanderers next, so we'll get into previewing some of the games that are coming up, and we may as well start there given we're talking about Adelaide United. How do you see that game going? Where do you think that's won and lost?
It's an interesting one because both teams are really out of form at the moment. We know what's been going on with the Wanderers. A lot of what's been happening off the field has been taking all the headlines at the moment, and the Marco Rudan suspended. They've got a lot of injuries at the moment, a lot of suspensions at the moment. So it's two teams desperate for points. It's going to be a really fascinating contest. You expect a decent crowd at Cooper Stadium as well. I actually can't split them. I think this game's going to end as a draw. They played earlier this year that the Wanderers won that game at CommBank Stadium, but this time at Coopers. I think it's going to be a high-score draw. These two teams last year played some cracking games, especially one at Coopers that ended 4-4. So I'm expecting quite a few goals in this game, and I reckon that neither side's going to be able to come away with the 3 points. Yeah,
I've struggled to tip this one as well. Every time I've wanted to tip Adelaide this year, and I have, they've almost always let me down, but I'm going to let them back in this year. I think they can maybe get it done and really kickstart their finals hopes for the rest of the year. The round, of course, actually opens with Brisbane Roar hosting Western United. Western, obviously, a bit unlucky, perhaps, midweek, losing to Melbourne Victory with a couple of late stoppage time goals. But they've really struggled just for the results this year. It's been a really hard slog.
Yeah, it's been really tough. And, yesterday sort of epitomised that when you have a look how young their defence was, throwing in 3 players who are under the age of 20 in Kane Vidmar, Charbel Shamoun and Kader Kador, who 2 of those players were basically playing NPL the other week. Kador was starting the other day against Northcote in the NPL, gets the call to come in and play on the Tuesday night against Melbourne Victory. So a big change from there. They've got a lot of injuries, a lot of players out at the moment, but they have shown a little bit of a turn in sort of form. They've been in a lot of games this season, but their defence has let them down in bits. Keen to see if Daniel Pena plays this game. He plays will go a long way to helping Western United in this one. I think it's an interesting one because Brisbane do need the points. And yes, they have played less football than Western United in the last week, but I think Western United are coming in with a bit of momentum. Yes, they may have lost that game in heartbreaking circumstances on Tuesday night, which, can make or break or whatever it might be. But I actually think they're going to be good value to get a point from this game.
Yep. Like you say, they're actually pretty much identical in terms of form over the last 5 games. No, despite their position on the table, they're probably not the easy beats a lot of people would expect them to be. Brisbane Roar, obviously, with a bit of turmoil themselves off the pitch, with Ben Khan having to take some medical leave and some change in direction there. So I think I'll agree with you on that one. I'll tip the draw. Sydney FC taking on Melbourne City. Where do you see that one going?
It's an interesting game because, again, Melbourne City need to win. They got a point against Melbourne Victory, which was certainly an improvement on the 5-1 loss against Brisbane Roar the week before. Sydney FC at the moment, one of the hottest teams in the league. They're in some really good form. Fuktale has found a formula that's working for them. They're starting to get points again, which is making them one of the teams that I think when it comes to finals, they're one of the teams you don't want to play. They've got a lot of experienced campaigners. It's a game at Allianz Stadium, and I think that tips the scales in Sydney FC's favour. No Tolgai Arslan again for Melbourne City. I know they've got Lecky back. I know they've got Marco Tilio back. But I still think Sydney FC are just going to be that little bit too strong at home, and they're going to come away with a narrow win in this game.
Yeah, I've tipped Sydney FC there as well. I think the home advantage. I think Melbourne City just aren't the Melbourne City of old at the moment. They're really struggling to just grind out the results that they may have otherwise have grinded out in previous years. And like you say, I think Tale, it was maybe a bit of a slow burn for him getting started, but they certainly look like one of the teams to beat now. And like you say, they're definitely not a team I'd want to be playing in finals. So I think they'll get the win there. Newcastle taking on MacArthur. On the form guide, I guess MacArthur looked the better side, but Newcastle are a team that sometimes play better than perhaps their form lets on, but another team that really struggles to keep out the goals at the other end.
Yeah, that's Newcastle's biggest concern because they do get the goals. I mean, Apostolos Stamatolopoulos has been the revelation of this season. You know, he's up there in the Golden Boot race. But as you said, they've been in games. So this is a really hard game to pick because MacArthur have been good. But they're also playing in midweek this week in an AFC Cup game against the Mariners. So again, a short turnaround for them, going on the road as well. So I think this is a tough game to pick, but I think MacArthur will be good enough to get a point in this game. They were unlucky against Wellington last Sunday. They've been good. They've been getting a lot of draws as well this season. So the scales tip more towards that. And I expect a response from the Jets as well after what was a disappointing result against Western United. But whether it's enough to get 3 points, I just don't think so. I think it's going to be a tight game there.
Yep. And then we've got a distance derby, Perth Glory hosting Wellington Phoenix. We've touched on Perth a bit already, a bit more optimism around that club at the moment. Obviously, Wellington are doing very well this season as well. So it could be a very exciting game. I guess it will come down in some way to how Wellington handle the travel. How do you see that game going?
I'm going out and saying that Perth Glory is going to win this game. I think Wellington have had a lot of absentees and they've done really well to ride the wave of key players being out. Now, they might get some players back this week, but still, I think the travel is another game on the road for Wellington. It's the longest away trip for them, having to go all the way to the other side of the country. Taking on a Perth Glory team that are right now red hot. And I think, as we've seen, these are probably the two most resilient teams in the league. Like, you got one team, Wellington, that's been able just to grind out results, go on the road. They might sacrifice a lot of the ball play and just try and get a point and be happy with taking that point because it's been enough to get them to where they are right now. Yeah. They're playing against a Glory team that are playing with more than that. They've got this sort of chip on their shoulder at the moment. They want to stick it to everyone else and say, yeah, we've had the cards stacked against us this season, but we're going to prove you all wrong. And I just get this sense at the moment that they're going to ride that wave through and they're going to come away with what's going to be a win on Saturday night. But I think it's going to be another classic. I reckon, I know it's a late kickoff for those on the Eastern Seaboard, but if you're up, definitely stay up and watch this game. It is going to be a cracker.
Be worth a look, and we'll flow in nicely to Premier League, which we'll talk about later. But look, I think it'll be a cracking game. I think they're going to cancel each other out. I've gone a draw, but I'm expecting plenty of goals. It could be like a 3-3, maybe even a 4-4. We'll see. Of course, Wellington are just as likely to try and batten down the hatches and pinch a 1-0 that turns into a 1-1. But I would expect a few goals in that game. And then we'll finish off the round with Melbourne Victory taking on the Central Coast Mariners. Again, two teams that are certainly up there in the mix. On their best days, they're quite good. On their off days, particularly Victory can be a bit of a tough watch at times. But, how do you see this one going?
Tough one, isn't it? Because, Victory needed that win against Western United and they left it late. They left it very, very late, but they got the job done. But they're taking on probably the most informed team in the league right now in the Mariners, who have been just sensational since the start of the season since that tough start where they lost those first 4 games. But again, similar to Victory, playing in midweek in that AFC Cup game against MacArthur. So again, now going on the road, it's going to be tough. Victory, as well, as we said, played Tuesday night, played Saturday night, 2 very emotionally charged games because of especially what was going into the lead up on Tuesday. But I expect it's going to be a good turnout at Amy Park on Sunday. And I think we're going to see a really entertaining game. I actually think Victory is going to score a couple in this one, but I think just like the leg in Gosford, it's going to end in a 2-2 draw, which, is sort of to form with Melbourne Victory. And I think that will be draw number 11 if it ends as a stalemate. So they'll be one off the record, which Western Sydney Wanderers still have.
Yep. Arzani, can he play football or not?
He showed that he definitely can. I firmly am a Daniel Arzani truther.
Yeah.
I think that he has got so much ability. It was great to see him come on and play to the manner that he did on Tuesday night. And I think he'll probably return to the starting lineup. At least that's you'd hope based off that performance. He's done enough to warrant a start. But looking forward to seeing how he go against the Mariners.
Yeah, Arzani to score the winner because that's the narrative. So we'll go with that. All right, cool. So we'll switch lanes and we'll head over to the Premier League in the UK. It's a very short turnaround. I feel like the game week literally just ended this morning with Man City getting a late win over Brentford, and it kicks off all again really tomorrow morning with Liverpool. Liverpool, obviously, one of the teams we picked out in our talking points this week on the Premier League Pulse column. What have you made of them lately? Obviously, they had a good win last week, but did come at a bit of a cost.
Yeah, well, they're getting the results at the moment, but they are losing players very, very quickly at the moment. Curtis Jones, Diego Jota, and Darwin Núñez all went off, and I think Darwin Núñez's injury is not as bad as the other two, but Jota now out for a couple of months. We saw how good he was during that patch when Salah was at AFCON, and they're big losses when you think about who's already out. Alisson, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Dominic Szoboszlai, Thiago again injured. Joel Matip, the list goes on. They could have up to about 10 first-team players out for that game against Luton. Now, if there's any team that can find a way to still get results, it's them because they've got the depth to fill those gaps. So you lose Jota, but Salah comes back into the starting lineup. You lose Curtis Jones. You can throw someone like Harvey Elliott or Ryan Gravenberch in there as well. They've got players that can fill in those roles. Even if Núñez misses, you've still got Cody Gakpo. That's the beauty of having the depth and the sort of the team that you have when you're Jurgen Klopp and you go out there every week and you have an embarrassment of riches to pick from. But there are a lot of big games coming up. The games are stacking up heading into the international break. They play the EFL Cup final against Chelsea on the weekend. They play Man City during this run. They'll have their Europa League ties, which kick off in a few weeks as well, which their opponent will be determined after this Friday. So it's going to be an interesting watch to see how Liverpool deal with this stretch because it's a lot of key outs. And I know they've done well to weather that storm. But when you've got two teams breathing down your neck as well, every game has that little bit of extra gravity. It's just full-on pressure from here on in. And like you say, you look on Transfer Market at their injury list, their injury list almost takes up the whole page before you can see the next fixture. So it's a really it's a big injury list to overcome, but they have shown this year, that they're able to overcome, key players missing, as you sort of mentioned, Mo Salah going away to AFCON. They sort of rode that wave. I think the question then was where would the goals come from without him? And they still seem to flow pretty well. So yeah, they're the team to beat, I think, but it's almost like everything's going to come down to this game against Man City coming up. I just feel like, that's the game they need to win to give them the breathing space, to give them the ability to maybe drop a point here and there and maintain their lead. But as it stands right now, unless they're winning that game against Man City, it's going to be hard for them to perhaps finish the season on top. The other, I guess, talking point from the column this week, we looked at Rasmus Højlund at Manchester United. United finding some form. Maybe they've left it a little bit too late. But they're back, I guess, in the top four race to a certain extent. And Højlund's goals have definitely been the driving force behind that. I think a player that always, showed glimpses that he had something special to offer United. I think the first half of the year it really came down to a real lack of service, and there were some stats floating around the halfway mark, showing that of all the, I guess, number 9s in the league, Højlund received the least passes of any of them, or one of the least. I think the more service he's been getting, he's obviously shown that he's able to put the ball in the back of the net. A bit lucky with the first one this weekend, but it was an opportunity that presented itself, and he showed no nerves in taking it. So how important is he going to be for the run-in for United? Well, absolutely massive, because you look at United's woes in front of goals this season. I think they've only scored something like 35 goals this season. You compare that with the teams that they're going up against for the top 4 spots in Villa and Tottenham. They've scored over 50. Yeah. So it just shows what that gap is. And you think back to the start of the season where Højlund wasn't scoring and where were the goals going to come from during that patch. And you look at their stats, their top goal scorer alongside Rasmus Højlund is Scott McTominay, who's playing deeper in midfield, not someone who's playing in that final third. So it's been massive for them. It's been good to see him find his confidence again because, when a player comes across a young player with that much hype, that big of a price tag as well from Atalanta, he's had to live up to the billing. And once he got that first goal, it feels like just the weight of the world is off his shoulders now. And I think he scored basically in every game since bar one of the FA Cup games against Wigan. So every game since then he's scored. Hopefully he can ride that sort of momentum going into this run because United are going to need it because right now they're playing catch up to try and get in the top four. Villa are in a bit of inconsistent form at the moment. Tottenham are starting to drop a few points. So the door is opening for United. If they can keep getting results at this point, you never know. They might be able to pinch fourth, and that I think would be, all things considered, a bit of a win.
Yeah. So we'll look at the games this round. So obviously I'm certain by the time you've watched this game will have been played, but Liverpool take on Luton Town. We need to get the tips down for the record. Can you really tip against Liverpool in this one?
No, even with all the injuries. At home, I think they'll be too strong. Luton have been gallant this season. I've really loved watching Luton play because it feels like there's that little bit of extra something with them. But I think Liverpool are just going to be too strong.
Yep. Crystal Palace taking on Burnley.
I think this is looking at a draw. It's the start of a new era at Palace with Oliver Glasner coming in, but it's going to be tough. Burnley need points, but Palace haven't been in the best of form either, so I think they're going to cancel each other out.
Yep. I think maybe some new manager bounce might come into play here.
Potentially,
I'll tip Crystal Palace for the win there. Aston Villa taking on Nottingham Forest. Another sort of interesting game. Like you said, Aston Villa have been a little bit shaky, but they have the quality to beat a Nottingham Forest for sure.
Yeah, and Nottingham Forest do come in with a little bit of momentum after beating West Ham, but I think Villa are just going to be too strong. They need the wins. They need to find some consistency again. That's something that's really lacked since around December. So I think that if they can get a win here, it will really help them in that push for fourth. But I think Villa are just going to be too strong. Yep,
I'll tip Aston Villa there. Manchester United taking on Fulham. They really do seem one of the form teams in the league at the moment. Any reason to tip against them at Old Trafford?
No, not at the moment. It's one of the most confident I've been tipping Manchester United in quite some time, right now. But because it used to feel like it depends what side of the bed they wake up on. But I think that they'll be too strong and they'll grind out a win here.
Yeah, I've got United winning that one. Brighton taking on Everton. I find these games always sort of interesting.
Yeah.
Obviously, Everton with the points deduction, they're super desperate for wins here. But Brighton, I feel like at their best, they should be able to win this one. So I'll tip them. How are you going?
Yeah, exactly the same. I think considering it is in the south of England, it is in Brighton, they're going to be too strong. And Everton have dipped off a little bit since where they were riding that sort of wave after the points deduction. They were getting points on the board. It's sort of tapered off a little bit as of late. So I think Brighton are just going to be too strong there.
Yep. Bournemouth versus Manchester City. I think I've been saying this for weeks now. I don't ever see a reason to tip against Manchester City. Yourself?
Completely agree there. I think Manchester City are going to be too strong. Even though they haven't been as dominant with their wins, they're still finding a way to get points. So I think they'll come away with 3 here.
I just think when you've got the depth on the bench that they have, I mean, really, unless you're playing the top teams, you're always going to find an answer off the bench or it's just the embarrassment of riches that Pep has. So, yeah, Manchester City for the win there. Another interesting one, Arsenal taking on Newcastle. Arsenal, they found their form again. I think... I questioned them a bit on this podcast in previous weeks. As good as they have been, they probably don't have the consistency to match a Manchester City or a Liverpool. But these are the sort of games that they need to start winning regularly to prove that they can be a genuine title contender.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at home here against Newcastle, a Newcastle team that has been a bit up and down again this season, I think they're going to be too strong and win this game. 11 goals in 2 games coming into this one. So they've found some form in front of goal and they haven't conceded any as well. This is a much tougher sort of proposition, but I think they'll come away with 3 points here.
Yeah. Wolves taking on Sheffield United. Sheffield United have really struggled this year, haven't they? They've shown a bit of spirit, I think, the last couple of weeks, but... You'd be hard pressed to go against Wolves here.
Oh, I completely agree. I think Wolves are going to be too strong and they're going to win this game quite comfortably.
Yeah. And then we'll finish off the round with West Ham taking on Brentford. West Ham have picked up some amazing results this year, but this has dropped points written all over it for West Ham.
Oh, absolutely. And they haven't won a game yet this year. Since the turn of the year, they have just dipped completely. It's been a real change of where they were in 2023, sort of at least the start of this season. And I don't think it changes. I think this game ends as a draw. I think Brentford are a good enough value at the moment. You know, we saw what they did against Manchester City, pushing them all the way. I think they'll take that momentum to the Olympic Stadium.
Yep. I'm going to go a Brentford win here.
Wow.
And then if West Ham win, you guys can thank me for that later. So that wraps up, I guess, all the Premier League and A-League discussion. So a big thanks to Nick for joining us this week.
No, thank you very much for having me.
Make sure you check out the My Betting Mates website. There are columns on the Premier League and the A-League, the PL Pulse and the A-League Alert. They're weekly, and we'll be back next week to wrap up all the results from this weekend and look to the week ahead.